Remember that warm, comforting feeling of nostalgia? That sudden rush when you hear a song you haven't heard in years. The one that instantly pulls you back to a summer evening. The smell of grass, the voice of someone who's no longer here. It's the ache of familiarity, the illusion that there was a time when everything made sense. We all feel it, and for a moment, it feels like home. But what if that same warmth, that gentle longing, isn't as harmless as it seems? What if nostalgia, the emotion we turn to for comfort, can also be used to steer our thoughts and shape our decisions? Not through manipulation or lies, but through something far more subtle, emotion itself. Imagine a force so powerful it can rewrite the story of the past, not with facts, but with feelings. It doesn't erase history, it edits it. It polishes the edges, fades the mistakes, and plays the highlights on repeat until the good old days. Remember less of a memory and more of a myth. This isn't fiction. It's something we live with every day, and what we buy and what we watch, and what we remember. Because nostalgia doesn't just make us remember, it makes us believe. Every generation thinks of nostalgia as harmless, a shared warmth, a quiet tribute to the days that built us. But nostalgia isn't neutral, it's selective. It remembers the melody, but forgets the noise. In its most innocent form, nostalgia is an anchor. It keeps us steady in moments of uncertainty, but in its most potent form, it's a compass that doesn't always point north. It can be used to guide, to comfort, or to sell. Companies, artists, even societies have long learned that nostalgia connects faster than reason. It speaks to the emotional brain, the limbic system, the same part that processes scent, music, and memory. When we feel nostalgia, our brains release dopamine and oxytocin, the same chemicals responsible for trust and love. It's not just remembering, it's reliving, and that's where its power lies. Nostalgia doesn't change the past, it changes our relationship to it. It makes history feel personal, safe, and sacred. And once the past feels sacred, it becomes a story worth protecting, repeating, and sometimes reinventing. Chapter 1. The Warm Glow That Blinds. Understanding nostalgia's appeal. Why does nostalgia feel so good? Why does a song from your teenage years still move you more than anything new? Or why does the smell of old paper or rain or pavement feel like coming home? To the brain, nostalgia isn't just emotion. It's an experience. Neuroscientists have found that nostalgia activates several regions of the brain at once. The hippocampus, where memories are stored, the amygdala, where emotions are processed, and the prefrontal cortex, which constructs meaning. It's a symphony of recall and feeling. When those circuits fire together, the result is a deep sensory warmth. A kind of mental time travel that reassures us that the person we used to be still lives within us. In MRI studies, participants recalling nostalgic memories showed increased activity in the medial prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain tied to the self or our sense of I-ness through time. This suggests that nostalgia isn't just remembering, it's reaffirming identity. When life feels unstable, nostalgia acts like emotional glue, holding together the fragments of who we were and who we are. It's our mind whispering, "You've been here before, you've faced change before, you'll survive this too." But memory, for all its warmth, is not a perfect record, it's a remix. Each time we revisit a memory, we don't replay it, we rebuild it. The hippocampus retrieves fragments, the amygdala paints them with emotion, and the prefrontal cortex turns them into a narrative. In this process, details shift, the lighting gets softer, the laughter louder, the colors warmer, pain fades, joy lingers. It's not that the brain lies, it edits. And like any good storyteller, it edits for emotional coherence, not accuracy. What remains after years of revisiting the highlight reel of life, the laughter without the argument, the vacation without the traffic, the youth without the anxiety. This is how the mind protects itself. The human brain is wired to preserve what stabilizes us emotionally, to ensure that the story of our life remains comforting enough to carry forward. But this editing process has a quiet side effect. We compare the clarity of memory to the uncertainty of the present. The past always wins, it feels richer, simpler, and more certain, not because it was, but because it's finished. The present is messy, full of half-written sentences and unanswered questions. The past has closure. Psychologists have long understood nostalgia's therapeutic side. It's not just wistfulness, it's medicine. In major times of loneliness, loss, or major life changes, nostalgia restores continuity. It reminds us that life has always shifted beneath our feet, and yet somehow we're still here. In one study, participants asked to recall nostalgic events showed measurable increases in optimism and a sense of belonging. belonging. Their body temperatures even rose slightly, evidence that nostalgia can literally make us feel warmer. Other studies have found that nostalgia fosters generosity and empathy, as if remembering that we were once cared for makes us more likely to care for others. But what happens when nostalgia leaves the personal realm and becomes collective? That's when it turns into something larger than emotion. It becomes identity. Collective nostalgia gives groups a shared sense of belonging. It creates community around memories of the way things used to be. Festivals, old songs, retro fashions, they all allowed people to feel part of something continuous. It's comforting, almost sacred. It bridges generations. A grandparent's memory of their youth becomes a cultural myth retold through music, design, and story. Yet collective nostalgia has its blind spots. The same emotional glow that binds people together can also filter out the full complexity of history. When a society begins to define itself by its almost comforting memories, it risks polishing away the very detail that made the past human. Every era carries hardship and contradiction. The simplicity we remember is often the absence of awareness, not the absence of complexity. Take the Victorians, who romanticized the countryside even as they built cities of soot and iron, or the 1950s remembered as the golden age of family life, though it was also a time of immersed conformity and quiet struggle. Even today, people look back at the pre-digital decades as more peaceful, forgetting that every generation has felt overwhelmed by the speed of its own progress. The truth is, nostalgia doesn't show us how things were. It shows us how we felt when we believed things were simpler. It's not a window into history, it's a mirror of emotion. And while it comforts us, it also filters reality into something softer, safer, and easier to hold. So why do we cling to it so tightly? Because nostalgia is proof of continuity in an impermanent world. It reminds us that even though everything changes, technology, culture, relationships, the emotional core of being human stays the same. The need to love, to belong, to feel connected across time. Nostalgia comforts us, yes, but it also blinds us if we mistake its glow for truth. The past wasn't perfect, it was simply ours, and that alone is why it shines so brightly. Chapter 2. Curating the past, the architects of manufactured memory. If nostalgia connects us emotionally, there will always be people, and the entire industries also learn to curate it. Not out of malice, but instinctively. After all, nostalgia is one of the most pervasive storytelling tools humanity has ever known. It makes us feel before we think, and wherever emotion goes, opportunity follows. The art of curating nostalgia is as old as civilization itself. Ancient Roman poets like Virgil wrote about the golden age that had passed, painting their present in the soft light of longing. In the 18th century, European architects revived Gothic cathedrals and classical temples to evoke grandeur of lost eras. Even then, nostalgia wasn't just about remembering, it was about framing memory to give the present meaning. Every generation in its own way has reached backwards to find emotional footing. Today, the impulse is both art and industry. Movie studios have mastered the emotional calculus of familiarity. When they reboot an old franchise or reimagine a classic film, they aren't merely chasing profit, they're tapping into something deeper, reassurance. A familiar melody, a recognizable logo, or a returning actor instantly transports audiences to a time when life seems slower, simpler, or just easier to understand. A single piece of music in a trailer can awaken 1,000 buried emotions. The audience isn't just buying a ticket, they're buying the feeling of safety that comes from knowing how the story will end. Music does this even more subtly. Vinyl records, once replaced by CDs and streaming, have made a cultural comeback, not because of superior sound, but because of the ritual, the soft crackle before a track plays, the tactile act of flipping the record. It's a sensory experience that modern convenience can't replicate. The analog hiss and warmth are imperfections that signal authenticity. It's the sound of something human, tangible, real, a counterpoint to a world of digital perfection. Fashion, too, follows the pulse of nostalgia. Designers routinely look backward, reinterpreting styles from the 60s, 70s, or 90s, blending old silhouettes with new fabrics. These revivals aren't accidents, they're emotional design. Each era carries a story, and wearing it allows people to feel part of that story. A leather satchel or a wool overcoat isn't just an accessory. It's a bridge between now and then, a quiet rebellion against disposability. Fashion becomes a language of continuity, proof that even in a world obsessed with the next new thing, some styles endure because they remind us of who we were. Even technology, the symbol of progress itself, now trades in nostalgia. Developers intentionally build retro aesthetics into modern platforms. Camera apps recreate the faded tones of Polaroid films. Note-taking programs mimic the click and hum of typewriters. Websites replicate the pixelated charm of early internet pages. The irony is striking. Even as we innovate, we reach backward for reassurance. We build digital futures that look like the past because the past feels more real than the present. And then there's social media, the most powerful curator of memory humanity has ever created. Platforms like Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok are engineered to blend memory with marketing. On this day, reminders, auto-generated slideshows, and year-in-review videos serve a dual purpose. They make us feel connected to our own past, and they keep us emotionally tethered to the platform itself. The algorithms understand something profound. We don't just want to remember, we want to be reminded, and nostalgia becomes data-driven, transformed into a looping highlight reel that keeps us engaged, entertained, and endlessly revisiting what's already happened. But this orchestration of nostalgia isn't sinister. It's strategic. It plays to one of the brain's most consistent biases, the mere exposure effect. Psychologists discovered that the more familiar something feels, the more likely we are to trust it, even if it's objectively no better than something new. It's why advertisers reuse classic jingles, why logos rarely change too much, and why retro branding so often succeeds. In uncertain times, the familiar feels like truth. This explains why imperfections, the flicker of film, the hum of a tube amplifier, the fading of an old neon sign have become emblems of authenticity. In a digital world polished to perfection, the flawed and the handmade seem honest. We crave the texture of imperfection because it reminds us that someone, somewhere, touched what we're seeing. Entire industries are now built on this emotional economy. Heritage brands, whether they sell watches, whiskey, shoes, or coffee, position themselves as timeless custodians rather than trendsetters. They trade not in novelty but in narrative, the promise that what they offer has survived generations. It's the emotional opposite of the disposable. Their message is simple but powerful. Some things never change, and that message works because amid constant digital noise, consistency feels like peace. But nostalgia's commercial success carries a quiet risk. When everything around us, from fashion to media to design, constantly references the past, it becomes easy to confuse comfort with meaning. The world begins to feel like a loop, endlessly remixing itself instead of moving forward. We start mistaking emotional familiarity for depth, and innovation begins to feel threatening instead of exciting. Nostalgia in moderation roots us, but too much of it can make us afraid to imagine something new. The stories we tell about yesterday should enrich our creativity, not replace it. Because while nostalgia soothes the heart, it can also lull the imagination to sleep. The past should inspire us to move forward, not convince us that forward is a mistake. Chapter 3. The fragile balance when nostalgia divides. When nostalgia expands beyond personal memory, it transforms into cultural identity. It stops being a private reflection and becomes a shared belief, a story that entire groups, communities, or nations tell themselves about who they are. What begins as a personal comfort becomes collective myth-making, shaping not only how we remember, but how we behave. Shared nostalgia is powerful. It can unite people across generations, bridging gaps of age, experience, and even ideology. It gives communities a sense of continuity, the feeling that despite all the change around them, some essence has remained. You see it in the way towns revive old festivals, how families gather every summer to cook traditional recipes, or how craftspeople preserve old methods in an age of automation. These are living testaments to the cultural memory, tangible proof that we still care about where we came from. A shared song, a familiar taste, an old ritual. These things don't just remind people of the past, they remind them of each other. That's why nostalgia, when channeled honestly, can strengthen social bonds. It speaks a language beyond words. We remember the same things, we belong to the same story. But like any emotional bond, nostalgia can be fragile when it's idealized too strongly. When one version of the past becomes the official story everyone is expected to share, it begins to narrow rather than connect. connect. What started as unity turns into a quiet form of exclusion, not out of cruelty, but because memory by nature is selective. It highlights the comforting, the familiar, and the beautiful, while blurring what was uncomfortable or inconvenient. The selectiveness is what makes nostalgia so seductive and so incomplete. Every golden age we recall was, in truth, uneven. The past carried joys and hardships, fairness and unfairness, closeness and constraint. But memory is a way of polishing the rough edges, leaving us with a simplified version of history that fits neatly into our emotions. Think of the phrase simpler times. It's one of the most common expressions of nostalgia, and one of the most misleading. When people say that life used to be simpler, they rarely mean that the world itself was easier to live in. They mean that it felt simpler. Decisions were fewer, rhythms were slower. Expectations were clearer, but that simplicity often came from limitation. Fewer options, fewer voices, less information. What we miss isn't the structure of the past, but the sense of peace we associate it with. The same goes for technology. Many long for pre-digital decades, imagining them as times of genuine human connection, handwritten letters, real conversations, and slower living. And while that's true in part, it also ignores the isolations, misunderstandings, and inefficiencies that progress helped ease. The yearning isn't for the absence of modern life, but for the presence of attention. The ability to be fully in one place, in one moment, without the pull of constant distraction. In that sense, nostalgia is rarely about time at all. It's about texture, the feel of old wood under your hand, the warmth of incandescent light, the sound of a crowd singing the same chorus. It's about the destiny of experience, the sense that life once felt thicker, more tactile, more human. When people say they miss how things used to be, they're often longing for qualities we've let slip. Patience, presence, craftsmanship, and sincerity. But nostalgia, if held too tightly, can distort those values into rules. The same emotion that unites can begin to divide, not because people disagree on what to love, but because they disagree on what to keep. A community trying to preserve tradition can find itself resisting change. A culture celebrating its heritage can start rejecting innovation. The balance between honoring history and embracing growth is delicate and easily tipped. This is why nostalgia can be both a bridge and a barrier. It can remind us to value what endures, kindness, skill, and community. But it can also convince us that change is loss rather than evolution. We begin to guard the past like a fortress instead of treating it as a foundation. The beauty of continuity hardens into fear of difference. You can see this tension in countless places, in architecture debates between preservation and modernization, in education systems caught between tradition and innovation, even in workplaces struggling to adapt to new ways of thinking. In each case, nostalgia whispers, don't fix what wasn't broken. But sometimes growth isn't about fixing, it's about expanding the story and to include more voices, more experiences, and more possibilities. Balancing is everything. Nostalgia works best when it's honest, when it acknowledges that the past was meaningful but not flawless. It should guide us, not govern us. The goal isn't to live in the past, but to carry forward what was best about it. The integrity of craft, the depth of relationships, the respect for time. If we can do that, if we can remember without idealizing, preserve without freezing, and celebrate without excluding, nostalgia becomes something more than longing. It becomes wisdom, a way of grounding ourselves in what was real so we can walk more clearly into what's next. Because the past, after all, isn't a museum to be guarded. It's a story we're still writing. Chapter 4, Echoes Through Time, Lessons from History. Throughout history, nostalgia has served as both a muse and a mirror. It reflects humanity's longing for stability whenever the world around us shifts too quickly. Every great leap forward, every age of discovery, invention, or upheaval has been followed by a backward glance. It's a rhythm written deep into civilization's heartbeat. Progress, reflection, reinvention. In the Renaissance, Europe rediscovered the beauty and logic of ancient Greece, and Rome after centuries of turmoil. It wasn't escapism, it was a recalibration. Artists like Leonardo da Vinci and architects like Brunelleschi reached backwards not because they rejected the present, but because they sought structure within chaos, the symmetry of classical columns, the humanism of ancient philosophy. These were not nostalgic indulgences, they were ways to anchor a changing world in something that still felt eternal. The Renaissance was nostalgia at its most constructive. a bridge between memory and imagination. Centuries later, during the Industrial Revolution, nostalgia took on a softer tone. The arts and crafts movement, led by figures like William Morris and John Ruskin, emerged as a response to mechanization's cold efficiency. They didn't reject machines outright, they rejected forgetfulness. Factories had made things faster, cheaper, and more standardized. But in the process, something vital had been lost: the intimacy of the maker's touch. The moment's revival of hand craftsmanship and organic design wasn't a step backwards. It was a moral reminder that beauty and integrity are intertwined. The same emotional cycle unfolded again and again. In the early 20th century, as cities grew and modern life accelerated, nostalgia romanticized the frontier, the open land, the pioneer spirit, the myth of self-reliance. The longing wasn't for hardship, but for simplicity and independence, qualities that urban life seemed to erode. Then came the 1950s, where nostalgia for small-town wholesomeness masked the anxieties of a rapidly modernizing, media-saturated world. The 1970s revived the 1950s rock and roll, a musical time machine to rediscover joy and rebellion amid social unrest. The 1980s, in turn, romanticized post-war optimism through neon colors and cinematic grandeur. And then when the 2000s came, nostalgia reached for the 1980s, bright, confident, analog, as a refuge from the uncertain hum of the digital age. Each of these revivals tells us the same story. When the future feels uncertain, humanity borrows reassurance from memory. Nostalgia becomes a kind of emotional architecture, a way to make sense of rapid change through the familiar patterns of the past. But in the 21st century, this pattern has accelerated beyond recognition. Technology has collapsed the distance between past and present. The internet, not just a tool, it's a living museum. Every photograph, song, film, and artifact of modern life can be summoned instantly, anywhere. We no longer simply remember the past, we scroll through it. With a few taps, we can watch the moon landing, listen to 1920s jazz recordings, or wander through digital recreations of ancient cities. Old movies, commercials, and cartoons, once bound to fragile reels and fading tape, now live forever in data. It's miraculous, and yet it comes with a strange side effect. Time no longer feels linear. The past has become a playlist, shuffled endlessly by the algorithm. We live in what cultural theorists call perpetual nostalgia. Every decade is alive at once. 1970s design trends coexist with 1990s fashion. Vinyl records sell beside streaming subscriptions. The aesthetic of every era are available simultaneously, creating a kaleidoscope of borrowed moods. The result is a culture that feels timeless but also strangely suspended. When every moment of history is instantly accessible, the idea of newness begins to blur. Artificial intelligence has deepened this effect. AI tools can now imitate the voices of long-dead singers, paint the styles of masters like Van Gogh, or even restore ancient sculptures with digital precision. These feats are astonishing, acts of technological resurrection, but they raise profound questions. If we can recreate the past endlessly, what happens to our sense of time? When memory becomes edible, when history becomes a set of files we can remix at will, what does authenticity even mean? Already we're seeing the beginnings of this paradox. AI-generated art can blend the brushstrokes of the Renaissance with the lighting of modern cinema. Old photographs can be colorized and animated, breathing life into moments once frozen. Historical figures can speak again through deepfake technology. The past has never been so vividly alive, yet never so artificial. There's beauty in this, the chance to preserve, to restore, to understand. But there's danger too. The more perfectly we recreate what was, the easier it becomes to linger here. The past can be endlessly replayed. What incentive is there to write new stories? The irony is that by reanimating the past so vividly, we risk dulling our curiosity for what comes next. The future, once seen as a horizon of discovery, now competes with the comfort of familiarity. Progress starts to feel like disruption, an interruption to the cozy rhythm of nostalgia loops. But history's greatest lesson is this: nostalgia can inspire beauty, but progress demands imagination. The eras we celebrate, the Renaissance, the Enlightenment, the Jazz Age, were not born from imitation, they were born from transformation. They didn't recreate the past, they reinvented it. They took what was known and reshaped it into something new, something alive. The Renaissance didn't rebuild ancient Rome brick for brick. It rediscovered Rome's spirit. The arts and crafts movement didn't just return to medieval workshops. It reimagined craftsmanship in the industrial age. True creativity has always used the past as a springboard, not as a sanctuary. And that is perhaps the most important echo of all. Nostalgia becomes wisdom only when we let it move forward. The goal is not to live in yesterday's light, but to carry its warmth into tomorrow, to build something new that still feels human, even as the world continues to change. Chapter 5, Reclaiming Our Future, Seeing Clearly. Nostalgia isn't weakness, it's proof that we feel, that we remember, that we still care, that somewhere inside us lives a ache to belong to something lasting. It's the emotional fingerprint of being human, the longing to preserve meaning in a world that keeps shifting beneath our feet. In a sense, nostalgia is our soul's way of reaching for continuity, for the thread that ties who we were to who we're becoming. And yet nostalgia becomes dangerous when we mistake it for truth. The glow of memory can be blinding. It warms us, but also distorts, turning the soft haze of recollection into the hard edges of conviction. When we begin to believe that the past was better rather than different, nostalgia stops illuminating and starts obscuring. It narrows our vision of the present, convincing us that everything meaningful already happened, that the best songs have already been sung, that the best stories have already been told. The way forward isn't to reject nostalgia, it's to understand it. Nostalgia isn't an enemy to be silenced, it's a signal to be interpreted. It's a mirror, not a map. When we find ourselves longing for the past, we should pause and ask, what are we actually missing? Is it the time itself or the way we felt in it? Often what we truly miss is not the world as it was, but the version of ourselves that once lived there, younger, freer, unburdened by what came after. We miss the clarity of our first experiences, when summers felt endless, when relationships felt unbreakable, when possibilities seemed infinite. Nostalgia at its core is a yearning for lost perspective, for the way we used to notice things before life taught us to rush past them. And maybe that's nostalgia's quiet gift. It doesn't just make us long for what's gone, it reminds us of what we've stopped seeing. The patience to linger, the gratitude to notice beauty in small things, the courage to build something lasting instead of chasing something new. These aren't outdated values, they're timeless instincts. Nostalgia isn't asking us to go back, it's asking us to remember forward, to bring those instincts into present, where they still matter. Nostalgia teaches balance. It reminds us not that all progress is improvement, and not all tradition is stagnation. There's a wisdom in slowness, value in repetition, and meaning in imperfection. In a culture obsessed with acceleration, nostalgia whispers, wait, remember what made it beautiful. It invites us to preserve craftsmanship in an age of convenience, to protect sincerity in a time of performance, and to seek genuine connection in a world distracted by constant noise. If we treat nostalgia as a teacher rather than a destination, it becomes a guide towards deeper living. It helps us reconnect with what's human. The need for depth over surface, story over spectacle, longing over status. It invites us to build futures that feel lived in, not just optimized, futures that remember their roots. But if we treat nostalgia as home, if we start to live inside the echo rather than the moment it traps us, we end up looping through memory like a favorite song played too often, its magic fading with each replay. Comfort becomes confinement. Reflection becomes repetition. The truth is, the past is never really gone. It's woven into us, into our choices, our habits, and our instincts. Every step forward carries a whisper of where we've been. But the future is where those memories find meaning. It's where recollection becomes creation, where the lessons of yesterday become the foundations of tomorrow. So hold on to nostalgia, cherish it, but hold it lightly. Let it remind you of what matters, kindness, patience, connection, but don't let it convince you that meaning only lives behind you, that past isn't a place to return to. It's a set of coordinates that helps us navigate the uncharted. Because ultimately, nostalgia is not about escape. It's about integration. It's about how we make peace with change, how we carry what we've loved into what comes next. The world will keep moving, the seasons will keep shifting, but we decide whether our memories become anchors or lanterns. The past is comfort, the future is courage, and somewhere between them lies the truth. the fleeting, fragile moment we're living in right now. I mean, I'm all for nostalgia. I love all things vintage. I love history in the past. I'm just not a huge fan of like all the movies being remade and everything being rebooted, like the TV shows, because first of all, they're just not as good as the originals. And it's stopping people from creating like new movies and new stories because they're so obsessed with trying to make money by rebooting the past ones. At least like the movie Back to the Future, the director Robert Zemeckis made sure that you couldn't make a sequel or redo his movie, because in my opinion, like that movie is completely flawless and it should not be remade. So there's stuff like that, but I mean, I'm all for like vintage fashion, vintage inspired fashion. But I do agree that like nostalgia is a lot too. When you think like when you're younger, I guess maybe you're less jaded and just the world was different because you weren't necessarily exposed to it in the way that you are as you're older, because you become more jaded as you get older. In many ways lose hope with certain things. But so sometimes you look back at your past when you were younger and it just seems like simpler times. So I can see that too. Anyways, thanks for watching. Let me know your thoughts on nostalgia in the comments below.